One of the big lessons that I teach throughout the pages and chapters of Brainwashed is that insecurity is actually not a thing. It's the lack or the absence of a thing. Identity is actually a thing. You can maybe liken insecurity to darkness. Darkness isn't actually a thing. It's the absence of light. And in the same way, insecurity is not a thing. You don't have insecurities. You actually lack identity. Insecurity is always going to be there when there's no identity. In the same way that darkness will always be present when there's no light. It in of itself is not a thing. Insecurity is just the void or the chasm that's created when there's a lack of identity. And so Adam is always going to suffer from insecurity because he's chosen to separate himself from the very being that provides him with identity. Whereas Jesus is going to be full of identity, full of the light of identity, because he has chosen to be in intimate connection with the Father. The Father provides identity. Humans cannot provide identity for themselves, but we sure do try. Man, we love telling God who we are. We want to do everything to define ourselves. We want to do everything to try to grasp at straws to tell others who we are, tell ourselves who we are, and tell God who we are. But Jesus actually humbly accepts what the Father has to say about him. That takes humility. That kind of humility is only found when we are no longer walking in independence. The choice to be independent from God is rooted in pride. And pride is always going to have two fruits. The first thing pride produces is arrogance. But the second thing that pride produces is low self-esteem. See, pride is a focus on self. And as long as you're focused on self, you're always going to be full of pride. And if you're focused on your self's strengths, then that pride is going to produce arrogance. But if you're focused on your self's weaknesses, then that pride is going to produce low self-esteem or insecurities. See, so many times we think that arrogance and low self-esteem are different things. They're not different things. They're actually different fruits that grow on the same tree. And pride is the root. It's the seed of both of those fruits. Jesus rejects pride. He rejects pride and therefore does not walk in independence, but chooses humility to say, I don't know. I don't know who I am besides from who God tells me I am. I need to be programmed. I need to be brainwashed. See, it's human pride that says you could figure out who you are. That is arrogance and pride. And see, that focus on self is either only going to lead to arrogance, which the arrogant person thinks that their gifts make a difference, that their gifts are the sum total of who they are. So they walk in arrogance. In someone who's struggling with low self-esteem, they think that their weaknesses matter. They think that their differences are the sum total of who they are. See, low self-esteem and arrogance are both an over-focus on self, whereas godly confidence is rooted in humility, which says, I don't know who I am, but I know who God is, and I trust that what he says about me is true. That can only happen when we walk in intimacy with God. One of the best characters that demonstrates this, obviously the best character in the Bible that demonstrates this is Jesus. Jesus accepts the identity that God has for him. And then Jesus walks in that identity. I want you to see how the enemy tempts Jesus and compare that to how the enemy tempted Adam and Eve. What the enemy says to Adam and Eve is this: did God really say that you can't eat of the fruit on the tree? God knows. God knows that when you eat of it, you'll be like him. God's holding out on you. You can't trust this God. Think about what Satan then says to Jesus. He He says, if you're the Son of God, how about you turn these stones into bread? See, both of those are temptations surrounding identity. What happened right before Jesus is tempted by Satan? Well, at the baptism, heaven opens and the Father says, "You are my Son in whom I'm well pleased." As soon as that word is spoken, the enemy then says, if God actually said that, go ahead and prove it. The enemy's role there is to cast doubt on what God has said. In the same way that in the garden, the enemy is trying to cast doubt with Adam and Eve on what God said. Because the enemy always wants to cast doubt on the character of God. But Jesus doesn't fall for the trick. Whereas Adam and Eve did fall for that trick, Jesus is not going to fall for that trick. He says, I don't have to prove to you that I'm the Son of God. And because he has an intimate relationship with the Father, he doesn't have to prove his identity. Because intimacy will inevitably lead to identity. Jesus walks in the power of his identity. When other people try to tell him who he is, Jesus knows who he is. His brothers, his biological brothers don't believe in who he is, but Jesus knows who he is. The disciples don't even really understand who Jesus is, but Jesus knows who he is. Pontius Pilate doesn't understand who Jesus is, but Jesus knows who he is. The Sanhedrin doesn't know who Jesus is, but Jesus knows who he is. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, they don't know who Jesus is, but Jesus knows his identity. See, the world is full of people who are either going to try to tell you who you are or don't believe in who you are. But like Jesus, you have to have had an encounter with God, a history with God that gives you the confidence to know who you are. Jesus becomes the archetype for what it looks like to walk in the fullness of our identity. Next, we're actually going to talk about identity a little bit more because I think that identity is at the heart of the Brainwashed message. Make sure that you pre-order the book, though. The book comes out soon, and once the book comes out, it'll be at retail price. I want you to be able to grab it while it's still on the pre-order sale. So make sure you pre-order the book and come back next week as we continue to dive in to the topic of identity. Love you guys.